Hello everybody, it's Sarah and today I am back with another review, and that review is of The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which is the first book in the Burning Kingdoms series. I always want to say Empire. I wanted to say I don't know why, but I know why it is, because Esha K. Banker's series is called The Burnt Empires and this is The Burning Kingdoms, and it confuses me because I have a small burp brain, so yeah. But anyway, this book was the June buddy read for my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, and that book club is all about reading adult high fantasy written by women as well as genderqueer folks. Every month I upload a choice of 4 books onto a Twitter poll, and you get to then choose which book you want to read for the next month. June, the choice was The Jasmine Throne, and for July, if you want to join us, the choice was Jade City by Fonda Lee, and all the links to the Twitter and the Discord and everything, if you want to join, are linked down below, so definitely go and check it out. But today it's not about Jade City, today it's all about The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. So this is, as might seem obvious, an adult high fantasy that is written by a woman. This is a generally South Asian inspired fantasy, and we follow mostly 2 characters. The first character is a princess who has been imprisoned by her brother, and her brother wants her to kill herself, basically. However, she is not ready to do that, and she tries her best to, first of all, get free, and second of all, push her brother off the throne of the empire. And then the second character we follow is the handmaiden of the princess, who might be more than she seems, who might have some magic even, and she is actually not just a handmaiden, but she is a priestess in hiding. And so we follow those 2 characters and their journey within this book. Also, as some of you might know, this is part of the Sapphic trifecta of 2021, which consists of The Unbroken, She Who Became the Sun, and The Jasmine Throne. And yeah, I'm really excited that I now have read 2/3 of this Sapphic trifecta and very much enjoyed both of those 2/3. So now getting into the review, as usual, my review will be spoiler free, and I will start with the negative things and then get to the positive things about the book. And I have to say there's not that many particularly negative things that I found personally about this book. The one thing that I can think of is that there were quite a few POVs, actually, aside from our 2 main POVs. And I thought some of those were a bit unnecessary, some of those didn't really add anything to the story. I mean, I didn't mind them as it was, but also I think I might have enjoyed it more if we had spent the time that we spent on those other POVs kind of establishing our main characters a little bit more. Not that they weren't well established as was, but I just thought it just was a bit boring sometimes in between, because they were those random characters and I didn't really care about them. I mean, they did add something in terms of world building, and a lot of times it helped explain some of the context of the things that were happening right now. But overall, still, I think those things could have also been added to the story in another way, rather than just having random POVs, like random POV characters that get 2 chapters each, and it's just, you know, I found it personally a little bit unnecessary. So that was basically already it for the specific negative things I have to say about this book. I honestly don't have anything else that's, you know, as I said, specific, that's negative, that I want to say about this book, so moving on to the positive stuff. Let's start with the characters. I found the characters incredibly well written, and I honestly have found it rarely that you have characters like in this book where all of them are so sure of their motivations and where their motivations are very well established. I mean, maybe it's wrong to say that all the characters, especially the 2 main characters, are sure of herself, because one of the 2 of them does have a little bit of insecurities around some things, but it made sense why she had those insecurities. However, those insecurities didn't mean that her motivations still weren't very, very clear from the very beginning. And I just really appreciated it. I knew where all the characters stood. I knew what their thoughts were on things. I knew what their motivations, as I said, were. And I just really loved that. I really enjoyed that. Then also next to side characters, I mean, all in all, we have a rather smaller cast of characters compared to other epic fantasy that I have read before. So there were only a handful of people really that you needed to know who they were. But aside from that, even though we spent most of our time, aside from, as I said, throwaway chapters with our two main characters, we still had very well established side characters. And just as with the main characters, I knew what the motivations of the side characters were. I felt like I knew who they were and not just, you know, randomly got attached to them, because that sometimes happens, that you get attached to the person who gets like 2 lines in the entire book. But I got attached to them because I knew who they were, and I knew, once again, what their motivations were, who they were as people, what their feelings were on different things, and so on. And I just, again, I really appreciated that, because it just made for a very well balanced and well-rounded cast of characters. Because even though you had those two very much main characters, that didn't really mean that you then pushed the side characters completely to the side and they were never a focus of the story whatsoever, and you could basically write the whole story without them. So I just really appreciated all the characters and the way they were written, even though I personally, a lot of times, maybe didn't get too attached on a personal level to the characters. I just found them really interesting to read about still. Something I also very much appreciated in this book was the romance, because within this book you had, as I have mentioned a lot of times already, you have the motivations of the characters. And a lot of times when you have books and then have a romance that is introduced, and that does play a major part in how the character arcs are of the main characters, a lot of times when you have a romance introduced, it then takes over, and suddenly all the other motivations are secondary and don't really matter. That absolutely wasn't the case here, and I loved that. I actually was a little bit worried at the beginning, because the way this book was advertised, I wasn't sure if it was, you know, a romance heavy book or not. Because part of how this book was advertised was very heavily focusing on that it is a sapphic book. And so I was like, okay, is it gonna be a romance heavy book or isn't it? And yes, the romance did play a part in this story, but again, it didn't take over. It didn't play too big a part of the story, and I really like that. But I also think that it's kind of a problem maybe a little bit with the advertisement, because the way I read how this book was advertised, I was like, okay, maybe romance fans will pick this up and will pick it up solely for the romance and are then disappointed that the romance doesn't have a big enough focus. But at the same time, maybe some epic fantasy fans who get turned off by a lot of romance in their books, or like a heavy focus on romance, get turned off also from the way this was advertised, because they think this is gonna have a big romance plot. So yeah, I think maybe there was a bit of false advertisement the case here when it came to this book. But anyway, I personally found the romance really well developed, and I found it really well done, and I found the chemistry between the two characters was just there and just so beautifully written. But at the same time, I just appreciated so much when you have a fantasy book that then doesn't go the YA route, or often YA route of, well, the world is ending, but we got love, peace. So, you know, I don't particularly like that always, but definitely wasn't the case here. And, you know, the two main characters have their priorities straight, and their priorities don't change just because they suddenly fall in love. And I really appreciated that. So the last few things I wanted to say are maybe the plot. The plot, I mean, at some points, maybe that's part of the negative things, although it's neither negative nor positive. This was one of those books where the first book felt a little bit like a prologue. Sometimes it just happens sometimes in epic fantasy series, because you have a lot more world building to do, you have characters to set up, you have the plot to set up, and you only have a certain amount of words. So sometimes epic fantasy books, first books in epic fantasy series, just feel a little bit more like a prologue rather than a book that has its own plot and its own finished story. And I felt like that was a little bit the case here, but it's not something I mind. It's something that I know from a lot of series that I myself love very much, so didn't really care about that. There was a lot of setting up to do and a lot of world building to do, and I absolutely love the world building in this. Again, it's just something that I find very much is that within Western fantasy there is now this focus a lot of times on grimdark. And so I just love a lot of times when especially BIPOC authors who get their inspirations from their own heritage or sometimes even the countries that they live in, a lot of times the worlds are just not as, you know, just dark and just brown and gray tones seemingly, but they are so vibrant and so rich. And that I do sometimes also get with Western or more typically Western fantasy, but usually with more typically Western fantasy that isn't grimdark. For example, The Mask of Mirrors also has a very vibrant world building, but that's because it's like in a Venetian style setting. And this one, just the South Asian inspirations are so heavy and so beautiful and so gorgeous, and it just makes you really wanna, I don't know how to say it other than like dive into the story, dive into the world, and I just appreciate this so much. Also in terms of the world building, once again, something that we see a lot of BIPOC authors do is kind of decolonize fantasy and have conscious colonial commentary. That was like 3 C's, but conscious colonial commentary within their stories. And that is definitely the case here, but compared to, for example, The Unbroken, which as I mentioned is one of the other books in the trifecta. By the way, I just always randomly point to the back because that's about where the books are. But compared to The Unbroken, where the colonial power was very much pictured as a Western power, at least the way I read it, here you have 2 different cultures, 2 different powers, but both of them are very much South Asian, and neither of them is a Western power. There's like nothing Western about this story. And so yeah, I just appreciate kind of digging deep into these, I would say, decolonial epic fantasies and seeing what choices authors make in terms of commenting on colonialism and so on. And so yeah, just absolutely love this about this book as well. And yeah, I think that was all I wanted to say about this book. If you have read this book, please share your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, if you're interested in reading this book or picking it up, tell me in the comments down below as well. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as my book club, as I mentioned, are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!